And when you go looking into it, it's not even that good. You know, it's like nobody says that they saw anybody shooting in any other location other than Lee Harvey Oswald.
How about right here?
I don't want to see the TV. I'm recording all the matches.
Well, do you want to sit? Not like I can turn this around facing the TV.
So it's not even a matter of like I saw a shooter on the knoll. Nobody saw that. I saw a shooter in another location. Nobody saw that either. And it's like there's no physical
Unless you want
evidence.
to believe what's her face, Beverly Oliver.
Well, they might have said that years later, but
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
years later. It's after the fact, you know?
No tangible evidence.
And I mean,
Rather
the
than Oswald.
the hallmark of the conspiratorial belief of it isn't to argue that there's physical evidence which points to somebody other than Lee Harvey Oswald. The argument is all of the evidence which does point to Lee Harvey Oswald is fake.
Yeah.
Like, literally all of it. You name it, it's fake.
Exactly.
Sorry, I asked people for these questions like a week ago, and in that time, there's been a bunch of text messages. Sorry, we got some dead air. Steve Archer says, I think the Odio story would be a good topic. So what do you think happened with Sylvia Odio?
You know, I'm inclined to believe her.
Me too.
I think she was just mistaken. And this is one of the criticisms I have of Bureau Posner. He does a hatchet job on her. Makes her out to be some kind of a loony.
Mhm.
And I don't think that's fair, you know. I think she's pretty sober.
Well, like, I definitely think someone came to her door,
Yeah.
but I don't think it was Lee Harvey Oswald. That part of the story doesn't make sense.
No, it couldn't have been. She was just mistaken. Look, a lot of times what happens is that we telescope our memories. You think, and I explained this in the interview I did with Chris. So you think that you said or you saw a certain thing happening on such and such an occasion, but that was actually on a previous occasion, and somehow you telescope the two together. We all do that. And I have a very good long-term memory, but I've made mistakes like that.
Of course, everybody has.
So I've said that, you know, I was at a barbecue on such and such a day, and I said such and such a thing, right? And then my friends who were there said, no, that wasn't when you said it. You said it before that, on a different occasion. It's called telescoping memories. We all do that.
Well, also, like, not to be overtly critical of Sylvia Odio, but she did have some mental health problems. She was receiving treatment from a doctor. She was on medication for them. And, I mean, given the nature of her family, like, her father was involved in the Cuban underground. After this incident, she sent her father a letter telling him about it, being like, hey, these people came to the door and they claim to be friends of yours. And he sent her a letter back being like, be cautious about people who claim to be friends of mine, you know? But that's just more evidence that that incident actually happened.
Yeah.
What I don't believe is that it was Lee Harvey Oswald, but what I could believe is it was somebody in the Cuban underground using the name Leon Oswald or Lee Oswald, because that sounds like something a Hispanic person would do. They would change Lee to Leon because it sounds more like Latin, you know?
But she clearly said it was a Caucasian.
Yeah, but I mean, he could have just taken that name anyway, right? Like, if they were trying to frame him, they wouldn't have said Leon Oswald. They would have said Lee Oswald. Or maybe they said Lee Oswald and she remembers it as Leon Oswald. Or maybe it was just like once the shooting happened, his name is all over the place and she just associated those things when there was no association there. But it's like, again, what's the point of this? If it really was Lee Harvey Oswald, then that would be the potential tie to the Cubans that the conspiracy would want. Mm-hmm. So they wouldn't downplay it, they would play it up, the exact total opposite, right?
Right. As I said, the Warren Commission and the HSCA went out of their way to exonerate Cuba and Castro.
So this question, it's from Jim Hess, but he just cut and paste the questioning of Linda Mae Randall about the curtain rods. Do you remember anything about the curtain rods? Yes. What do you remember about that? He had told Wesley. Tell me what Wesley told you. What Wesley told me that Lee had rode home with him to get some curtain rods for Miss Payne to fix up his apartment. When did Wesley tell you that? Well, that afternoon, I suppose. I would have had to ask him. He wouldn't have just told me. You mean that night? Yes, sir. After he came home? I was on my way to the store, so I probably asked him when I got back what he was doing riding home with him on Thursday afternoon. You think that was the time that Wesley told you? Yes, sir, after I got back home. So this is Linda Mae Randall saying that her brother told her after they got home on the weekend, or no, sorry, it's a bit early for me, I'm confused there. After her brother got home on Thursday, he told her that Oswald had asked him for a ride to Ruth Payne's house to get curtain rods from Ruth Payne, but he never said anything to them about that. And he didn't, and there were curtain rods in her garage that were still there.
Yeah, so this whole idea that Fraser came out with a curtain rod statement because he was arm twisted by the police doesn't make any sense, right? Because
Well, I mean, it wouldn't be just him. It would also be
Is
Lenny
that
Mae.
your bag,
Yeah.
sir?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just looking at that. Yeah, it would also be her too. Like, she would have to be lying about that as well, you know?
Right.
Caesar.
So yeah, it just doesn't make any sense.
Is breakfast still on?
Over easy? Oh, hi there.
Cool.
He
I
doesn't
don't think you
need
need
that.
one.
He
Yeah.
doesn't
So
need
easy,
that.
yeah.
Oh, and coffee. No, black with sugar.
So our friend Fred Litwin asks, the anger of people who believe in conspiracy, the corruption of JFK assassination conferences where non-conspiratorial presenters are banned, that tendency to believe that every piece of evidence can be thrown out, the smearing of an innocent gay man, Clay Shaw, the intellectual dishonesty of Cyril Wecht. Those are all good topics to discuss. I mean,
Well, let's start out with Cyril Wecht. This guy, yeah. Okay, so in 1976, when he was testifying before the House Select Committee on Assassinations, he said something that goes completely against what he's saying now. And I'd like to know why.
well,
What new medical evidence has come up that would have made him change his mind?
Well, what did he say when he was on the HSCA's forensic pathology panel? Wasn't he the sole dissenting voice in that?
No, but he confirmed there was a rear shot that hit Kennedy. See, he says both shots were fired from the rear.
Caesar's on its way.
What exactly did he dissent on?
Yeah, water.
Well,
Water? Absolutely.
is that what he said in the 1970s?
As far as I remember, yeah, it was 1976.
Because I always thought he was the sole dissenting opinion on the HSCA's forensic pathology panel, but is that only with respect to the head wound?
I gotta look it up. But I know this because Gerald Posner, in a debate with Wecht, he brings this point up. He says, okay, so this is what you said in 1976. Now you're singing a different tune. So what is it that made you change your mind? What new medical evidence has come up?
At the London Weekend television trial, Bugliosi described him as the darling of the conspiracy theorists.
Yeah.
And that's kind of his thing. It's like that's how he's made a name for himself. It wasn't because he was a forensic pathologist. It was because he's the only forensic pathologist who's ready to get behind the idea that there was a conspiracy in the assassination of JFK.
Right, yeah. Totally.
To address your point, Fred, the anger of people who believe in conspiracy and the corruption of JFK assassination conferences where non-conspiratorial presenters are banned, this is very simple. This is what happens when people base beliefs on emotions instead of reason and logic.
Yeah.
And when you're based on emotions like that, it's easy to let your emotions influence your thinking.
Yeah.
And I mean, the attitude that conspiracy theorists often have in this case is that it's kind of like a David and Goliath battle, wherein, of course, they are David and the other side is Goliath. But that's not really the reality of it. The conspiracy theory is the popular opinion.
Yeah.
Always has been. Most of the books that were written are definitely a conspiratorial bent to them. Hollywood makes movies about how it was a conspiracy. They made a $40 million blockbuster, star-studded movie that we all love. You know, they are the popular opinion. They are the establishment opinion, you know?
So it is a David and Goliath situation, but in reverse, you know?
Kind of. Well, I mean, it's like, you know, they've had decades to firmly entrench themselves in the culture, and they've done a very effective job at doing that. So I mean, that the JFK assassination was a conspiracy, that certainly is the popular opinion and always has been. So it's like, I don't understand what they're all so angry about, because they kind of feed off of that persecution complex, similar to what his mother had, you know, similar to what Oswald himself had, you know.
Yeah.
They want to see themselves as the downtrodden people punching up, fighting the good fight.
Right, right. And I think it speaks to the integrity of the non-conspiracy writers. Like, you know, like when Posner came out with his book, so this is something I read in his introduction. Apparently his publisher were kind of disappointed that he wrote a book that was non-conspiracy, right? Because they thought that it wouldn't make money. Now, coincidentally, at that time, I think this is shortly before JFK was released, the movie. Then after that, they said, well, you know, I mean, so this is now in the public conscience, so so this is a good time to publish. But what I'm saying is Posner could have made a lot more money writing a pro-conspiracy book, right?
Yeah.
He actually took a financial risk by writing a book like that. Something so totally against the grain.
I mean, it's definitely not the book his publisher wanted him to write.
No.
And at the time it came out, you know, it was really the only book that had ever been published being like, this is actually what happened, you know? It was the first book to ever really back up the official conclusion in a way that...
Well, no, I think there was a book called Conspiracy of One.
Oh yeah, who wrote that? Was that Harold Weisberg?
It wasn't Weisberg. No, Weisberg is a conspiracy, right?
No, but he also has kind of been like this gadfly in the conspiracy community. He's a conspiracy theorist, but he's like probably the most
Sober,
mild
right?
of them, you know?
No, Conspiracy was One was written by forget the name. I could look it up though.
Brock asks, discuss the autopsy or the single bullet theory. Speculate whether Oz might have been trying to go when he was wandering around Oak Cliff. We've covered the where was Oswald going part of it. The autopsy and the single bullet theory, I mean, it all makes sense. Like we were commenting last time, the autopsy pathologists, they really are the authors of the single bullet theory. You know, they were the ones who postulated that a single projectile transited his body, making no bony contact. If that's true, then the single bullet theory has to be true.
Right.
You know, so that's the long and short of it, really. Sorry, I'm just quickly cycling through these groups, trying to find the questions from like a week ago. Okay, this one's good. Jack Ruby and his possible connections to John D. Norman. Could Ruby have been involved in not only gun running but also in sex trafficking? Possible connections to Ferry and Arcadia in New Orleans. I don't know who John D. Norman is. I don't think Ruby was not a criminal. He wasn't.
Technically, no, he wasn't.
I mean,
Until he shot all of us.
yeah, until he murdered somebody. He owed a lot of money in back taxes to the IRS.
Right.
So that's about it. I mean, really, because he had a business that is active at night. Like, if you have a business which is active at nighttime, you are going to rub shoulders with the criminal underworld. It's inevitable. Right?
Plus, where's the evidence that he knew David Ferry?
Yeah, there isn't any.
This is the thing about these conspiracies, right? So it's all just speculation.
It's all just asserted claims, you know?
He said this, she said that, this could be, that could be. We need tangible, solid evidence.
And it's like, if somebody shows up and makes a claim, conspiracy theorists have this attitude that it's like, this claim is true until proven false. You know, like
it's actually the other way around, right?
Yeah, the default setting for them is to believe things until they have a reason not to, you know?
Right.
And even then, when you give them the reason not to, they still don't do it because they just want to believe it.
No, and they don't extend that same grace to eyewitnessing or statements that go against their narrative.
Of course.
Like Howard Brennan's testimony. Right?
Or Helen Markham.
Or Helen Markham's, right?
Or
they make her out to be
anybody
some
else.
kind of a kook, you know. Helen Markham.
Well, like, she was noted at the time for being like a bit of a screwball. But I mean, you know, what does that mean? Does it mean she's just an eccentric person and she's like a talker?
Yeah.
You know? It's just like, if you were framing him, why wouldn't you pick somebody else to be a witness?